Some doors change your life the moment they open. I did not know that when I knocked on the iron gate of the Romano estate just after midnight. Rain soaked through my coat and dripped from my hair as cold wind swept across the long driveway behind me. The city lights shimmered in the distance, blurred by water and exhaustion. My hands trembled. Partly from the weather. Mostly from uncertainty. I had spent the last 6 hours deciding whether I should come at all. Every reasonable thought told me to turn around. Every instinct told me I had no other choice. The estate stood on a hill overlooking the river, surrounded by stone walls and old oak trees. Warm lights glowed through tall windows. It looked less like a house and more like a fortress. The kind of place people only saw in magazines or from behind security gates. I tightened my grip around the small brass key hidden inside my pocket. It felt strangely heavy for something so small. My mother had left it behind years ago with a note containing only one sentence. If you ever run out of answers, take this to Vincent Romano. For years I ignored it. Then too many questions started finding me. A security camera above the gate shifted slightly. Someone had noticed me. A few moments later the gate unlocked with a quiet click. I hesitated. Then I stepped forward. The front door opened before I reached it. A tall man in a dark suit stood beneath the warm glow of the entryway lights. Even before he spoke, I knew exactly who he was. Vincent Romano. His photographs appeared in newspapers, business magazines, and charity events across the city. Yet none of those images captured the calm authority he carried in person. He studied me silently. Not with suspicion. Not with judgment. Just careful attention. Rainwater dripped from my sleeves onto the stone steps. For a moment neither of us said anything. Then his gaze shifted toward my hands and the signs of a difficult evening written across my appearance. Something changed in his expression. The distance disappeared. Come inside, he said. His voice was steady and direct. I opened my mouth to explain why I was there, but he shook his head slightly. You can explain later. The warmth inside the estate hit me immediately. Soft lighting reflected across polished wood floors. A fireplace crackled somewhere deeper inside the house. The contrast felt unreal after standing in the storm. Vincent handed me a towel without asking questions. Then he turned toward a man waiting nearby. Cancel tomorrow's schedule. The man blinked. All of it? Everything. The answer came without hesitation. The board meeting too? Everything. I stared at him. Surely there were more important things happening in his world than a stranger appearing at his door. Yet he spoke as if the decision required no thought at all. The assistant nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Vincent turned back toward me. You came here for a reason. I slowly reached into my pocket and removed the brass key. The moment he saw it, the room became very quiet. His eyes locked onto the symbol engraved near the top. A small crest worn smooth by time. For the first time since opening the door, genuine surprise crossed his face. He took a slow breath. Then he looked directly at me and quietly spoke a name I had never heard before. Abigail, where did you get Eleanor Whitmore's key? The name meant nothing to me. I stood there holding the brass key while Vincent stared at it as if it belonged to another lifetime. The fire crackled softly in the background. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Everything felt still except my heartbeat. I do not know who Eleanor Whitmore is, I admitted. Vincent finally looked away from the key and studied my face. He seemed to be deciding whether I was telling the truth. A moment later he nodded slightly. I believe you. The answer surprised me. Most people would have demanded proof. Vincent simply accepted what he saw. He motioned toward a sitting room near the fireplace. Sit down. I lowered myself into a leather chair while he remained standing. The brass key rested between us on a small wooden table. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then Vincent picked up the key carefully. Where did you get this? My mother left it for me. His expression sharpened immediately. Your mother? I nodded. She passed away 8 years ago. The room grew quiet again. Vincent looked down at the worn symbol engraved into the metal. What was her name? Rachel Carter. The reaction was immediate. Not dramatic. Not loud. But unmistakable. Vincent froze. Just for a second. Then he slowly sat across from me. Rachel Carter. He repeated the name as though he had not heard it in years. You knew her? I asked. No. He paused. But my father did. Confusion spread through me. How? Vincent leaned back in his chair. The firelight danced across the room while shadows shifted along the walls. 30 years ago, my father was involved in a private foundation. He glanced toward the key again. Rachel Carter and Eleanor Whitmore were connected to it. My stomach tightened. The same feeling I had experienced all week whenever another impossible piece appeared. Connected how? Vincent shook his head. I do not know. The answer sounded genuine. My father rarely spoke about those years. He stood and walked toward a bookshelf along the far wall. After a moment he removed a framed photograph and returned. Maybe this will help. He handed it to me. The picture showed 4 people standing outside an old brick building. A younger version of Vincent's father stood beside a woman I immediately recognized from family albums. My breath caught. That is my mother. Vincent nodded slowly. Then we are looking in the right place. I stared at the photograph. My mother looked younger than I had ever known her. Happier somehow. Beside her stood another woman holding a folder against her chest. Elegant. Confident. Familiar despite being a stranger. That is Eleanor Whitmore? Vincent nodded. I believe so. Suddenly the key in my pocket felt heavier than ever. My mother had known this woman. My mother had known Vincent's family. Somehow all of it connected to a foundation hidden decades in the past. Before I could ask another question, an older man entered the room carrying a small wooden box. He stopped beside Vincent. Sir, I found this in your father's archive. Vincent frowned. What is it? It was labeled with today's date. The room went silent. Slowly Vincent accepted the box and opened the lid. Inside rested a sealed envelope yellowed by time. Across the front, written in careful handwriting, were 6 words. Open when Abigail Carter arrives. My breath disappeared. Vincent stared at the envelope. Then he looked directly at me. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Someone knew you would come here tonight. I could not take my eyes off the envelope. The handwriting looked steady and deliberate, as though the person who wrote it never doubted this exact moment would arrive. Open when Abigail Carter arrives. The words seemed impossible. My mother had died 8 years ago. Vincent's father had passed away years before that. Yet somehow both families had been expecting me. The older man quietly excused himself and left the room. The door closed behind him. Only Vincent and I remained beside the fire. Neither of us moved immediately. Finally Vincent picked up the envelope and examined the seal. This is my father's handwriting. His voice was calm, but I could hear something beneath it. Curiosity. Maybe even disbelief. Then open it, I said softly. Vincent looked at me for a moment before carefully breaking the seal. Inside rested a folded letter and a smaller piece of paper. He unfolded the letter first. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain outside. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression slowly changed. Surprise. Recognition. Concern. Then something else. Respect. He finished reading and handed the letter to me. The paper felt fragile in my hands. Dear Vincent. If Abigail Carter has arrived, then the promise we made 30 years ago has finally reached its final chapter. The first sentence immediately tightened my chest. I continued reading. Rachel Carter and Eleanor Whitmore trusted us with something far more valuable than money. They trusted us with a future. One day a key would return. When it does, help Abigail find the truth. No matter what responsibilities you carry at that moment, they are less important than this one. I slowly lowered the letter. Suddenly Vincent canceling his schedule made sense. His father had instructed him to. Decades earlier. The realization felt almost unreal. What does it mean? I asked. Vincent glanced toward the smaller paper that had fallen from the envelope. Maybe this explains it. He unfolded it carefully. Unlike the letter, this page contained only an address and a single sentence. The room behind the library still waits. Vincent frowned immediately. The library. What library? He stood without answering and walked toward the fireplace. For a moment I thought he was distracted. Then he pressed his hand against a section of carved wood beside the mantel. A quiet click echoed through the room. I stared in disbelief as part of the bookshelf slowly shifted. Hidden behind it was a narrow doorway. You have a secret room? Vincent looked almost embarrassed. Apparently. We exchanged a glance before stepping forward together. The concealed room was smaller than I expected. Dust covered several shelves. Old boxes lined the walls. A single desk sat beneath a lamp that no longer worked. It felt untouched by time. Vincent moved directly toward a cabinet in the far corner. The brass key in my pocket suddenly felt warmer somehow. More important. Then I noticed something. A symbol carved into the cabinet door. The same crest engraved on the key. My pulse quickened. Vincent. He followed my gaze. The moment he saw the symbol, he stopped. Neither of us spoke. Slowly I removed the key from my pocket and held it up beside the carving. Perfect match. The room seemed to hold its breath around us. 30 years of questions. 30 years of secrets. 30 years of waiting. All leading here. Vincent stepped aside. I think this belongs to you. My hand trembled slightly as I moved toward the cabinet. The key slid into the lock effortlessly. I turned it. A soft click echoed through the hidden room. Then the cabinet door slowly opened. Inside rested a single wooden box. And on top of it sat a photograph of my mother standing beside Eleanor Whitmore, both smiling directly at the camera as if they already knew exactly how the story would end. For a long moment I could not move. The photograph rested on top of the wooden box as though it had been placed there yesterday instead of decades ago. My mother looked happy. Eleanor Whitmore stood beside her with one arm resting lightly on her shoulder. Behind them was a brick building covered in ivy. Sunlight filled the image. Whatever secret connected them, it had not looked like a burden that day. Vincent stepped closer beside me. Turn it over. I carefully flipped the photograph. My breath caught immediately. Written across the back in faded blue ink were 8 words. The future belongs to whoever chooses kindness first. Beneath the sentence were 2 signatures. Rachel Carter. Eleanor Whitmore. I stared at the handwriting. My mother had written those words. Somehow seeing her signature felt more emotional than seeing her face. Vincent remained silent, giving me time. Eventually I lowered the photograph and opened the wooden box. Inside were folders, letters, and a leather-bound journal tied with a ribbon. Everything had been preserved with extraordinary care. The first page of the journal carried Eleanor Whitmore's name. I opened it slowly. The entries began 31 years earlier. Most described meetings, community projects, and scholarship programs. Not businesses. Not investments. Lives. Families. Opportunities. The deeper I read, the clearer the picture became. Eleanor, my mother, and Vincent's father had helped create a private charitable foundation dedicated to helping people rebuild their futures after difficult circumstances. The mission felt simple. Give someone a chance before the world decides they do not deserve one. Then I found a page marked with a folded note. My pulse quickened. The note was addressed to me. Dear Abigail, if you are reading this, then the key succeeded in finding its way back to you. I closed my eyes for a second. Somehow they had anticipated everything. I continued reading. Your mother believed that every person deserves a door that opens when they need it most. This foundation became that door for thousands of people. One day, she hoped it would become that door for you as well. Emotion tightened my throat. I glanced toward Vincent. He seemed just as absorbed by the discovery as I was. Then something slipped from between the journal pages and landed softly on the floor. Vincent picked it up first. It was another photograph. This one showed a group of people standing outside the same ivy-covered building. My mother. Eleanor. Vincent's father. Several others. And in the center hung a bronze plaque. Vincent studied the image carefully. I know that building. You do? He nodded. It still exists. Hope immediately stirred inside me. Where? About 40 miles north of the city. He looked down at the photograph again. I have not thought about it in years. I examined the plaque more closely. The inscription was partially visible. Whitmore House. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered seeing it mentioned several times inside the journal. Whitmore House was not just a building. It was the original headquarters of the foundation. Before I could say anything, Vincent opened one of the folders inside the box. A document rested on top. He frowned. Abigail. Something in his voice made me look up immediately. The paper in his hand appeared newer than everything else. Much newer. Almost recent. Across the top someone had typed a single instruction. Bring Abigail Carter to Whitmore House before sunrise. Underneath the sentence was a date. Tomorrow's date. The document remained in Vincent's hand while silence settled over the hidden room. Bring Abigail Carter to Whitmore House before sunrise. Tomorrow's date. The words felt impossible. Everything else we had found could be explained by careful planning, old promises, and documents prepared years in advance. But this was different. This paper looked new. Recent. As though someone had placed it inside the box only days ago. How is that possible? I asked quietly. Vincent examined the page again. I do not know. For the first time since I arrived at the estate, he sounded genuinely unsettled. I understood why. Every answer we uncovered seemed to create another question. Yet somehow the questions were pulling us toward the same destination. Whitmore House. I looked at the photograph still resting on the desk. My mother's smile seemed almost knowing. As though she expected me to find this place eventually. Vincent carefully returned the document to the folder. We leave in an hour. An hour? He nodded. Whitmore House is 40 miles away. If we want to arrive before sunrise, we should not wait. I expected him to hesitate. To question whether any of this made sense. Instead he treated the instruction exactly the way he had treated everything else connected to his father's promise. As a responsibility. 20 minutes later we were driving through the darkness beyond the city. The rain had finally stopped. Street lights gave way to quiet highways and wooded hills. I sat beside Vincent while the brass key rested safely inside my coat pocket. The road ahead seemed endless. Neither of us spoke much at first. The night felt too full of thoughts. Eventually Vincent broke the silence. My father used to visit Whitmore House several times a year. I turned toward him. Did he ever tell you why? He shook his head. Only that some places matter because of what they represent. His hands remained steady on the steering wheel. At the time, I thought he was talking about business. I smiled faintly. And now? Vincent glanced toward me. Now I think he was talking about people. The answer stayed with me. Hours earlier I had arrived at his door carrying nothing except a key and 100 unanswered questions. Somehow those questions were slowly becoming something else. A story. A history. A purpose. The eastern horizon began brightening just before 5 in the morning. Pale shades of blue appeared above the trees. Then the road curved around a hillside, and Whitmore House finally came into view. My breath caught immediately. The building looked beautiful. An old stone manor surrounded by gardens and towering oak trees. Warm lights glowed behind several windows despite the early hour. The place felt alive. Maintained. Loved. Vincent parked near the entrance. Neither of us moved right away. We simply looked at the building. "This does not seem abandoned," I said. "No." Vincent's gaze remained fixed on the front door. "Someone is expecting us." The statement sent a small chill through me. Before either of us could step out of the car, the front door opened. An elderly woman appeared on the porch. She stood calmly beneath the morning light as though she had been waiting there all night. My pulse quickened. Vincent seemed just as surprised. The woman smiled warmly the moment she saw us. Then she walked down the steps and stopped beside the driveway. As we approached, her eyes settled on me. Not with curiosity. Not with confusion. Recognition. "Welcome home, Abigail," she said softly. "We have been waiting for you for 30 years. The words followed me up the stone steps and through the front door of Whitmore House. "Welcome home, Abigail. We have been waiting for you for 30 years. Nothing about the statement should have felt normal. Yet standing there beneath the soft morning light, looking into the elderly woman's kind eyes, I felt something unexpected. Familiarity. As though a part of me had already been here long before I arrived. The woman introduced herself as Margaret Whitmore. The name immediately caught my attention. "Are you related to Eleanor Whitmore?" I asked. Margaret smiled warmly. "She was my sister." The answer seemed to settle 100 questions at once. She led Vincent and me through a spacious hallway lined with photographs. Every wall told a story. Scholarship ceremonies. Community projects. Families smiling beside newly opened businesses. Students standing proudly in graduation gowns. The building did not feel like an old foundation headquarters. It felt like living proof that someone's kindness could echo across generations. Sunlight streamed through tall windows as we entered a library overlooking the gardens. A kettle rested on a nearby table. Fresh coffee filled the room with warmth. Everything felt prepared. Intentional. As though our arrival had been expected down to the minute. Margaret motioned for us to sit. Then she carefully placed a leather folder on the table. My pulse quickened immediately. Another clue. Another piece waiting to be discovered. "Your mother spent many years here," Margaret said softly. I looked up. "She did?" Margaret nodded. Rachel believed this foundation could change lives. Her eyes drifted toward a photograph hanging above the fireplace. My mother stood beside Eleanor, both laughing about something beyond the camera. The image carried a happiness I had rarely seen in old family albums. "She loved this place," Margaret continued. "And she loved the mission." Vincent remained quiet beside me. Listening. Watching. The same way he had from the beginning. Margaret opened the folder and removed several documents. Most people assume Whitmore House was funded by wealthy donors. She smiled gently. The truth is much simpler. She handed me a page covered with names. Hundreds of names. Every person who received help eventually gave something back. Sometimes money. Sometimes time. Sometimes mentorship. I stared at the list. Teachers. Nurses. Business owners. Engineers. Families. Entire communities connected through acts of generosity. The foundation had become far more than a charity. It had become a network of people refusing to forget the help they once received. Then Margaret reached into the folder and removed a sealed envelope. My name appeared across the front in familiar handwriting. Rachel Carter. My breath caught instantly. Vincent looked at me but said nothing. He understood this moment belonged to me. Carefully, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Dear Abigail. If you are reading this, then Whitmore House still stands. That means hope survived. Tears immediately blurred my vision. I continued reading. There may come a day when you wonder why I left you a key instead of answers. The truth is simple. Answers can be forgotten. A purpose cannot. My hands trembled slightly. Every sentence felt like a conversation I had waited years to have. Then I reached the final paragraph. There is one last room in Whitmore House. Eleanor and I agreed it would remain closed until you arrived. When you open it, everything will finally make sense. I slowly lowered the letter. The room felt completely silent. Margaret smiled softly. Vincent leaned forward. Neither of them needed to ask the question. We were all thinking the same thing. Somewhere inside Whitmore House, a final door was still waiting to be opened. The letter remained in my hands long after I finished reading it. Somewhere inside Whitmore House, a final room had been waiting for me all these years. The idea should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt inevitable. Every road seemed to lead here. Every clue. Every promise. Every unanswered question. Margaret stood and quietly walked toward one of the bookshelves lining the library wall. Eleanor insisted the room remain untouched, she said softly. Not even I have entered it since the day it was sealed. Vincent exchanged a glance with me. The seriousness in Margaret's voice made the moment feel larger somehow. This was not simply another hidden room. It was the destination my mother and Eleanor had spent decades preparing. Margaret removed a small wooden box from the shelf and placed it on the table. Inside rested a silver key attached to a faded blue ribbon. This opens the final door. My pulse quickened. I looked down at the key my mother had left me years ago. Then at the silver one. 2 keys. 2 women. 2 families. Somehow connected by the same purpose. We followed Margaret through a quiet wing of Whitmore House rarely used anymore. The hallway walls displayed photographs stretching back decades. Students receiving scholarships. Families opening small businesses. Volunteers renovating community centers. Thousands of lives touched by a simple idea. Opportunity. The deeper we walked into the building, the quieter everything became. Finally Margaret stopped before a wooden door at the end of the corridor. There was no nameplate. No sign. Just a small brass lock polished by time. She handed me the silver key. This belongs to you now. My fingers tightened around the metal. Then I stepped forward and unlocked the door. The click echoed softly through the hallway. I pushed the door open. Sunlight spilled through tall windows inside. Dust drifted through the air like tiny stars. The room looked less like an office and more like a memory preserved in place. A large desk stood near the center. Bookshelves lined the walls. Framed photographs covered nearly every surface. My mother seemed to be everywhere. Laughing beside Eleanor. Speaking at community events. Standing with students and volunteers. For a moment I forgot to breathe. Vincent remained quietly near the entrance while I walked deeper into the room. Then I noticed something resting on the desk. A video screen. Old but carefully maintained. A small note sat beside it. For Abigail. My heartbeat accelerated. Margaret smiled softly. Eleanor recorded this years ago. I pressed the play button. The screen flickered to life. Eleanor Whitmore appeared immediately. Older than in the photographs. Kind eyes. Warm smile. The room seemed to disappear around me. Hello, Abigail. My breath caught. Even though it was only a recording, hearing her voice felt strangely personal. If you are watching this, then Rachel's plan worked. She laughed gently. That does not surprise me. Your mother was the most determined person I ever knew. Emotion tightened my throat. Eleanor continued. The foundation was never our greatest achievement. She paused. People were. Images appeared on the screen behind her. Families. Graduates. Volunteers. Entire communities transformed through acts of generosity. Then Eleanor looked directly into the camera. One day, this work would need new guardians. Rachel believed that person might be you. Tears blurred my vision. Not because of responsibility. Because of trust. My mother had believed in me long before I believed in myself. Then Eleanor smiled one final time. There is one last thing you need to see. The screen switched to an image of a sealed document stored somewhere inside Whitmore House. Beneath the image appeared a single sentence. The future trustee agreement remains unopened. Waiting for Abigail Carter. The image on the screen remained frozen long after the video ended. The future trustee agreement remains unopened. Waiting for Abigail Carter. I stared at the words while silence filled the room. Everything seemed to lead back to the same idea. Not money. Not status. Responsibility. My mother and Eleanor had spent years building something designed to outlive him. Somehow they believed I would one day become part of it. Margaret walked to one of the bookshelves and gently removed a framed photograph. She handed it to me without speaking. The picture showed my mother standing beside a group of young students outside Whitmore House. Every face carried the same expression. Hope. She kept this on her desk for years, Margaret said softly. Whenever things became difficult, she looked at that photograph. I traced my finger along the edge of the frame. Why? Margaret smiled. Because it reminded her why the work mattered. Vincent stood quietly beside a nearby window overlooking the gardens. Morning sunlight illuminated the grounds outside. For the first time since arriving at Whitmore House, everything felt peaceful. The questions that had driven me here were slowly transforming into answers. Then Margaret crossed the room toward an old wooden cabinet built into the wall. She unlocked it with a small key and carefully removed a sealed leather portfolio. The sight of it immediately matched the image from Eleanor's video. My pulse quickened. This is it? Margaret nodded. The trustee agreement. She placed it gently on the desk between us. The leather cover looked worn from age but meticulously preserved. Across the front, embossed in gold lettering, were 3 names. Eleanor Whitmore. Rachel Carter. Anthony Romano. Vincent's father. The 3 founders. The people whose choices had connected our families for decades. I looked toward Vincent. His expression carried the same mixture of curiosity and emotion I felt. Margaret stepped back respectfully. The decision has always belonged to you. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the portfolio. Inside were letters, foundation records, and a final document signed by all 3 founders. I began reading. The language was formal, but the message was simple. Whitmore House and its programs would continue through future trustees selected not because of wealth or influence, but because of character. Every sentence sounded exactly like my mother. Then I reached the final page. My breath caught. Beneath the signatures of the founders appeared a blank line. Trustee successor. Waiting. Empty for 30 years. The realization hit me all at once. They had never chosen anyone else. They had left the position open. For me. Tears blurred my vision again. Not because of pressure. Because of faith. My mother had believed in a future version of me she would never meet. Few gifts could be greater than that. I slowly looked up. What happens if I say no? Margaret's answer came gently. Then nothing changes. You will still be loved. You will still belong here. The words lifted a weight I did not realize I was carrying. Nobody was forcing me. Nobody was demanding anything. The choice was truly mine. I turned toward the window where Vincent stood. What would your father have done? Vincent considered the question carefully. Then he smiled faintly. He would have asked which choice helps more people. The answer felt exactly right. The room grew quiet once more. Sunlight streamed across the desk. The blank signature line waited patiently. And for the first time since arriving at Vincent Romano's door, I realized I already knew what I wanted to do. Then Margaret opened another folder hidden beneath the agreement. Inside rested a letter addressed in my mother's handwriting. Across the front were 4 words that immediately stole my breath. Read this after deciding. I stared at the envelope for a long moment before finally reaching for the pen resting beside the trustee agreement. The room felt perfectly still. Sunlight spilled across the desk. The gardens outside swayed gently in the morning breeze. Somewhere in the distance, birds sang among the trees. Everything seemed to be waiting. Not pressuring. Not demanding. Simply waiting. I looked at the blank signature line one final time. Then I signed my name. Abigail Carter. The moment the pen left the page, an unexpected sense of peace settled over me. Not because I had accepted a responsibility. Because I had finally stopped running from the questions that had followed me for years. Margaret smiled softly. Tears filled her eyes. Vincent remained silent beside the window, but I noticed the faint smile he tried unsuccessfully to hide. The trustee agreement was complete. The promise had been fulfilled. Slowly I picked up the final envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting. Read this after deciding. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single letter. Dear Abigail. If you are reading this, then you made your choice without knowing what comes next. That means you chose with your heart. A small laugh escaped me through my tears. That sounded exactly like her. I continued reading. I never wanted you to inherit a foundation. I wanted you to inherit a belief. The belief that one person can change another person's life simply by showing up when it matters most. My eyes drifted toward Vincent. The memory of arriving at his door returned instantly. Rain. Exhaustion. Fear. And a stranger who opened the door anyway. The letter continued. Years ago, Eleanor and I learned something important. The world changes because ordinary people choose kindness during extraordinary moments. Never forget that. My throat tightened. Every clue. Every key. Every hidden room. They had never been about secrets. They had been about carrying that lesson forward. At the bottom of the page my mother had written one final sentence. You already found the door. Now become one for someone else. I lowered the letter slowly. No one spoke for several moments. Then Margaret walked toward a nearby cabinet and removed a large album filled with photographs. She opened it on the desk. Page after page revealed stories from Whitmore House. Students who became teachers. Families who built businesses. Volunteers who returned years later to help others. Lives connected through simple acts of generosity. This is your real inheritance, Margaret said softly. I nodded. She was right. It was never about buildings or documents. It was about people. Hours later, Vincent and I stood outside Whitmore House beneath the warm afternoon sun. The long night finally felt over. The uncertainty that had followed me for years had disappeared. In its place stood something stronger. Purpose. We looked back at the old stone building together. So what happens now? I asked. Vincent slipped his hands into his coat pockets and glanced toward the gardens. Now you help people. I smiled. That sounds suspiciously simple. The best things usually are. We shared a quiet laugh. Then I looked toward him. Thank you. Vincent shook his head. For what? For opening the door. His expression softened. For a moment neither of us looked away. Then he smiled. You brought the key. As the afternoon sunlight illuminated Whitmore House behind us, I realized how much had changed since that rainy night. I had arrived carrying questions. I was leaving with answers. I had arrived searching for the past. I was leaving with a future. And somewhere beyond the gardens, beyond the roads and cities and years ahead, my mother's promise continued exactly as she intended. Because sometimes the person who changes your life is not the one who gives you the answer. Sometimes it is simply the one who opens the door when you need it most.